We are currently living in a pretty tumultuous time in world history. There are quite a few huge conflicts happening in the world and also huge elections, including of course the US election, which the entirety of the world is always looking at. And overall there's a lot of stress, anxiety in the air, a lot of emotions. And among those emotions, something that I feel like a lot of you guys can relate to is feeling powerless, or in particular feeling powerless against your own government, or like an authoritarian system of power, which just does whatever it wants with no repercussions, and you cannot really do anything to combat it or to change it, even though you might live in a seemingly democratic country. And especially in the United States, a lot of people are feeling like they're annoyed of the American two-party system, and they're annoyed of having to essentially choose between the lesser of two evils every single time. Americans and people in tons of other countries in the world feel like they cannot really do anything about their country or their governments and where it's going, and in this video, I, Roman, your favorite neighborhood Russian, I'd like to try to relate to you guys a little bit because, you know, being from Russia, I do know a thing or so about feeling powerless against your own governments. That's kind of our entire history, you know what I'm saying? I want to talk about how a lot of people today, and especially Gen Z, feels very powerless and feel like they have no impact and they're very insignificant in the grand scheme of things and in the system of their country. So, what am I talking about? I mean, I'm pretty sure you guys are aware the election in America is happening, the entirety of the world is tuning in and watching it as a TV show. You know, it's Russians' favorite pastime actually to check out what is happening in American elections because you guys actually have elections that kind of matter. Barely though. Let's be real, that's what we're talking about in this video. Yes, everybody's going crazy. Trump visited McDonald's. They just released the Trump versus Kamala epic rap battle of history. For me as an outsider who's looking at what Americans are saying on social media, it almost feels like barely anybody who wants to vote for Trump or Kamala actually likes them. And everybody's like, yes, sure, they're not great, but... And that's kind of how it goes for a lot of people. Or also, a lot of people in America feel like they're not even represented in this election because, for example, a big deal breaker for them is that Kamala, just like Trump, is pretty much very pro-Israel. And it's the same on the conservative side, like a lot of people are not necessarily huge fans of Trump either. And again, looking at what Americans are saying, it feels like a lot of Americans are actually questioning whether this really is a democracy at this point. Basically, a lot of people are feeling like they don't matter right now, and, you know, I'm kind of a pro-Western Russian, but still, inside of me, there is a bit of a, you know, desire to almost make fun of it because, well guys, I don't mean it in any bad way, but the thing is I've actually received quite a lot of shit from Westerners online, from America and many other different countries, especially after the war of Russia and Ukraine started, the full-on conflict in 2022 in February. I've gotten comments and personal messages with like the most unhinged stuff possible, where most people would just insult me, say that Russians are like old slaves that want to bow down to the Tsar or whatever, and that if actually I was a decent person, then I would be out on the streets like overthrowing Putin right this very moment, with my own bare hands by myself. Once again, I'm supposed to overthrow the entire government and stop the war by myself. And if I don't do that, then I'm a slave or whatever. And the thing is, right, you know, to send those messages, you kind of have to think kind of highly of yourself, to think that you are actually able to stand up against the tyrannical governments and do something that will make a very big difference. That is gonna change everything. However, once again, as we're seeing for most people, for most regular people in America or in any other country that I would, you know, be talking about today, when you take a regular person, it's almost like they have no agency and no input, and people are feeling very powerless. And yes, in America you can do way more than you can do in Russia. It may be a flawed democracy, but it is a democracy nevertheless. Russia, I'm not really so sure, it pretends to be one. And I'm not trying to say that Russia and America are basically the same. They're not, but a lot of regular people from either country at the end of the day kind of feel the same. Like they have absolutely zero say in what is going on. Another reason why I wanted to make this video also is because there's also actually currently an election happening in the country of Georgia, the post-Soviet country in the Caucasus region where I actually lived for 2 years myself, and it actually was the country that I left to after I left Russia. I lived in the city of Tbilisi for 2 years. I absolutely fell in love with the country and the people and the culture. It's great, and that place is in my heart forever for sure. You guys see this little hat right here? Gift from Gatsu. Very nice, I like it. Anyway, if you guys follow what is going on in post-Soviet countries and kind of that entire region of the world, Eastern Europe in general, you might know that the country of Georgia since about 2004 had a very strong pro-Western, pro-European sort of strategy. But actually the current ruling party of Georgia, that is called Georgian Dream, is essentially being described by a ton of people as like a puppet party of Russia. And what's been going on recently is that Georgia's sort of movements towards possibly joining European Union and so on, they've been kind of stifled by the government because they've actually signed a few laws laws recently that are basically kind of the same laws we have in Russia, like the foreign agent law, and also they recently banned LGBT propaganda in media, just like Russia did in like 2013, and recently they banned it for all ages. So, and a lot of Georgians, and especially young Georgians, they're actually very invested and very interested in Georgia possibly joining European Union and having more cooperation with Europe. But what's happening right now is that Georgia is kind of steering more towards Russia as opposed to Europe, which many Georgian people obviously are not fans of, because Russia literally went to war with Georgia in 2008. So there's always constant protests in Tbilisi. For example, when I lived there was some very big protests actually related to this exact foreign agent law, sort of against this like Russian influence. And Georgia just now had the parliamentary election, and what happened is that this, ruling party, Georgian Dream, won. And obviously this kind of shattered the, the hopes and dreams of a lot of young Georgian people right now, and a lot of people are feeling also pretty powerless right now about the situation in their country, and I'm sure there are going to be huge protests and so on, right? Only time will tell what's going to happen there, but yes, this is also another place in the world right now where people are kind of feeling powerless and quite frustrated with where the country is going, and, they feel like they almost can't affect it. It's something that's been going on for quite a few years, right? And actually the truth is that a lot of the times, protests or certain attempts of the people to speak out against the governments, a lot of the times they fail and they end up in nothing, or worse than that, a lot of the times if these protests fail, they actually end up making the situation quite worse and quite more harsh and strict. Because also in this context, a lot of people always compare the 2013-2014 revolution in Ukraine, which was a huge event, of course, but a ton of people are comparing Ukraine in 2014 to modern Russia, essentially, and saying how, Russians, specifically, slaves or whatever, who just want to bow down to the Tsar because they're not able to create like a protest as good as the Ukrainians did to, actually topple the government or whatever. But there are a lot of things that happened in Ukraine that, just made everything go right for the protesters, so to say, right? Ukraine is still way more of a free country than Russia, way less of a police state than Russia, and also the anti-government forces in Ukraine kind of all joined powers against the president and the government, so, it was just an epic win. But it didn't happen that way in Russia, and it didn't happen that way in Belarus, for example, even though it seemed like, something crazy was going on, because a lot of people are not aware of this. A lot of people are saying that Russians never protest and they never tried to rebel or whatever, but there's been some very, very huge protests in Russia over the years, even during Putin's time in power, that actually kind of low-key had the government on the edge of their seats. For example, the biggest one by far was around 2011. The protests were absolutely massive, but they were essentially squashed and mismanaged, and there's just a lot of bad stuff. And people in Russia have been protesting for decades and decades and decades. And they've always been met with, police brutality and the police becoming only harsher on free speech and so on, right? So, a more recent example is once again the country of Belarus, also a country that is post-Soviet, that borders Russia, that is currently heavily influenced by Russia, and, is kind of considered by many people to be kind of almost a puppet state of Russia in its current, status. In 2020, a presidential election took place in Belarus. It was essentially an election that was very, very fraudulent. And the amount of people that went out outside on the streets to protest was actually absolutely insane. I was looking at those protests and just like not believing what I'm seeing. The magnitude and just the fact that this is happening in Belarus was unbelievable, because Belarus has always been considered by many people as a country that is just like the happiest with its government. Even though it's authoritarian, they never protest, ever. So like Belarus and Lukashenko as just the greatest goated leader, you know what I'm saying? But in 2020, the protests were insane. And the amount of people that I've met, people from Belarus who left there, because essentially they were participating in the process and, well, the process got squashed, and now they have like a, like a life sentence or something. It is absolutely unbelievable. It feels like, half of the youth of Belarus left the country or something because of those protests. And yes, once again, the people rised up, they were ready to sacrifice everything, and many people did sacrifice everything, but it failed, and that just happens, you know what I mean? It doesn't mean that these people deserve to be in an authoritarian country. It doesn't mean that these people deserve to be ruled by maniacs, right? It doesn't mean that they're genetic slaves or whatever. That once again are never questioned in authority because it's like in their genetic code or something, No. There's also Hong Kong, for example, right? That also failed. And there's an endless amount of these examples because unfortunately, real life is not a Marvel movie, it's not a comic book, it's not a story, it's not a Hollywood film. A lot of people are basing their expectations on what they see in movies. No, the good guys don't always win. And they don't always magically get the one-up over the bad guys at the very end of the story. That doesn't always happen. And right now I feel like a lot of us in the world are collectively feeling like we've all essentially kind of failed at certain stages, and we've basically entered the worst timeline, and now we feel collectively powerless about essentially not being able to do for this world what we want to do, to solve the problems that we'd like to solve, to stop the genocides. We feel powerless. And this applies basically to most citizens of most countries, right? But also, once again, because I'm Gen Z, I want to talk about us in particular. Gen Z, in my opinion, is kind of the ultimate powerless generation. And I feel like instead of bringing each other down and saying that, you know, you guys suck because you didn't manage to overthrow, you know, your tyrannical emperor or whatever, or, you know, saying these guys actually deserve to be ruled by, you know, once again, tyrannical authoritarian maniacs because they just don't know any better and they've never, you know, had an opportunity to live any other leader, so they just don't have a chance. Please try to be kinder and stop doing that, and just realize that all of us are in it together, and all of us, really, at the end of the day, or most of us, let's put it that way, most of us are kind of powerless. And the reason why I'm talking about Gen Z is once again because, you know, a lot of people talk crap on Gen Z these days. How, you know, we're superficial, or we, you know, we look at the phone, we stare at the phone too much and we scroll too much. I am holding my phone upside down. They say that our brains are rotten and that, you know, our attention span is cooked, and they might be right, quite honestly, yes. However, the thing is, a lot of this is like not really our fault. Most of these issues are caused by social media, and we all know that all the major social media companies, they exploit the imperfections of the human brain, like the disadvantages of the human psyche. They use and abuse our insecurities, our wishes, and our, you know, hopes and dreams, whatever, our fears. Everything is built around FOMO and the feeling of having to get gratification or whatever, right? And some kids are like glued to their phones watching TikTok since they're like 5 years old when they have no personality. I mean, what do you expect? I think the kids are alright, it's just that we've all been cooked by these companies that are trying to constantly perfect their algorithm for exploiting us and exploiting all of our human traits for monetization and for monetary value, right? No, we can't knock on, you know, the CEO of Facebook. We cannot knock on his door and tell him to, you know, stop doing what they're doing. And we're a generation that was kind of almost already born into this. And we never had a say in any of this, so we constantly have to change everything about how we interact with each other and with the world based on these changes in the algorithm that are constantly happening, that we do not know anything about and that we never asked for.
I never asked for this.
It's very much the same when it comes to politics also. These people are staying in power for years and years. They use their access to capital, resources, their connections. They use it to essentially also perpetuate a system where they get some sort of monetary value out of, you know, once again, exploiting human suffering. And yes, we're all powerless. And most of us young people these days in tons of countries, we feel like we've been born at a time when it was already like too late to even notice this. In tons of countries these days, we have these leaders that have been in power for 20 years now, like Turkey, Russia, whatever. You know, we feel like we've been born before we even had a chance to affect anything. And now it's like really hammering itself in. Now really feel the effects, and it's fucking scary. So, guys, I've been through all stages of, you know, grief, acceptance, or whatever the fuck, that entire process. I've been through a whole spiel with Russia, and all I'm trying to do in this video is to say that perhaps once again, there's something about the human experience that makes us very similar, that makes us capable of relating to each other and understanding each other's struggles, and I might have zero idea about what it's like to live in the United States. You guys might have zero clue what it's like living in Russia and living in that system. Or you might be from Europe or Africa or Asia or Australia, whatever. We all have vastly different circumstances and experiences, but at the same time, all of us can still relate on a very deep human level to the feeling of not being able to do anything and feeling like a little, you know, a little speck of sand on a beach, essentially, right? Feeling very insignificant and feeling like nobody out there is really looking for your voice. And once again, maybe instead of trying to make fun of each other's helplessness and sadness, let's have a little bit more empathy, and maybe that is gonna be the key to world peace, you guys. No, it's not, but hey, maybe at least somebody in the comments is gonna have a good conversation. So yes, guys, this is just something that I've been thinking of for a while now, and something that I've been sensing in a lot of people, from hearing what a lot of people from all over the world are saying. There's a lot of terrible shit happening in the world that we feel like we can't do anything, and we, you know, we're just watching it. It feels like that's kind of the zeitgeist right now, what many people are feeling, and I just wanted to talk about it because I think the time is right. So yeah, guys, I hope that did something for you. I hope you did enjoy today's video, and if you guys did, then as always, please make sure to like this video if you did enjoy it, and also, if you guys want want to support me additionally, and that is financially, then you can go over to the link down in the description and become a YouTube member. It is basically like YouTube's own version of Patreon. It's the best way to support me. Or you could also leave a super thanks underneath this video for a one-time donation. Thank you guys so much for watching this one, and I'll see you in the next one. And let's hope it turns out alright, okay? Bye. Keep hope alive.